Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be continuing our discussion about what is justice. Now last week we spent a great deal of time trying to define the terms criminal justice. We did a pretty good job of nailing down what criminal is in that we took the legal definition of criminal. If I commit an act that's deemed illegal in the geographic space that I'm in at the time that I'm doing the act, then that is a criminal act and that is in essence criminal. It was pretty easy to nail down, pretty easy to come up with a consensus about what criminal means. Justice was a bit more vague. It was a bit more difficult to really nail down. What does justice mean? And we went through a lot of schools of thought. We went through a lot of different philosophies, different perceptions, different cultural ideas, different belief systems people have about how to define justice. Well, this week we're going to take another step into that, and we're going to muddy the waters just a little bit more, because we're going to look at terms like, what is the ethical thing to do? What is the good thing to do? What is a good person? What's the right thing to do? What's the virtuous thing to do? What's the moral thing to do? And to answer this question, we're going to go back to some of our earliest influences, which are the Greek philosophers, especially Socrates, Plato, and then Aristotle. And we'll try to understand how they developed their ideas and what they thought about justice, what they thought about morality, virtue, the good life, being a good person. And we'll try to understand how understanding those concepts can help us be better professionals today in the criminal justice system. But I want to start off with a little short story, and I'm going to give you the short version of the story. It's a real story, but it highlights just how hard it is for us to come to a consensus about what it means to be just, what it means to be a good person, what it means to be moral. In the early 16th century, there was a ruler named Vlad Tepes. He ruled a small country of Wallachia. Now, Wallachia was kind of sandwiched between the two major empires of the time. They were both in conflict to see who was going to be the dominant power in the world. To the north was the Hungarian Empire. To the south was the Ottoman Empire. Now, his dad had tried to navigate this difficulty years before by making a deal with the Ottoman Empire, because the Ottoman Empire liked to make deals. They didn't like the headaches associated with taking over other countries. It was a whole lot of political trouble. It cost a lot of finances and resources. It was just more of a headache than it was worth. And so they liked to make deals with other countries where the people in power could stay in power as a puppet ruler and could send in tax money, revenue, resources, food, young men in case we need them for our armies to fight our wars, especially against this great Hungarian Empire. In exchange for that, you get to stay in power and you get to continue to rule your country. Well, Vlad's dad took the deal and he said, yeah, I'll do that. I'll send these resources and things to you in exchange for us being able to remain an independent country, an independent Christian country in between these two Muslim empires of the time. The Ottomans said, well, okay, we agree to that, but we need something to solidify the deal. We need an insurance policy. You have two sons. Send those sons to us. We will keep them here. We will raise them as nobles. We will provide them with education and all the best things that the world has to offer. But they'll be our prisoners. And they will ensure that you won't go back on the deal because you know, I know, everybody knows. If you go back on the deal, one of the first things we'll probably do is kill your sons. Well, Vlad's dad says, okay, fine, take my sons. And they go down and sure enough, they're trained and taught in the best schools by the best people, living a noble life. But Vlad kind of is resentful of the whole thing. And he still sees the Ottoman Empire as this evil empire that's exploiting his countrymen and only interested in world dominance. And he just hates them. He hates what he's done, what they've done to his country. He hates the exploitation that's going on. He hates everything about them. But he plays the game and keeps the peace. Well, after a while, his dad, back in Wallachia, decides, look, this ain't going so well. The people don't like the decision I made. Here I made a deal with this evil Ottoman Empire that's a Muslim empire. We're a Christian nation. We shouldn't be making deals with those people. We are sending our food, our resources, our money, our children to fight these wars that mean nothing to us. And what are we really getting in return? And so he says, you know what? I'm not sending what I owe you anymore. I'm done. And it's a popular decision with his people, and he's able to exploit the idea that they have his sons. He's able to say that, how can you question that I am a noble leader, that I care for this country, that I believe in its independence? I'm willing to sacrifice my sons in service to that idea. So you can't come at me and say, I don't truly believe it. I don't believe in what we're doing, because I'm willing for my sons to die in order for this to occur. Well, the Ottoman Empire don't want to kill his sons. They see, again, that's a bigger headache than what they really want to deal with. And so they send Vlad up with an army to run out his dad and put Vlad in as the new ruler, thinking that he will play along. He'll send the money, he'll be the puppet ruler, and life will go on and life will be good. And it is for a while. But Vlad all along is thinking in the back of his head, I don't like this. I don't like the Ottomans. I don't like what they're doing to my country. Our country should be free. Our country should be independent. Over time, he builds up defenses in his home. And he gets to a point where he's thinking about, I can now openly defy the Ottoman Empire. But he also knows that the nobles in the country may not support his new idea of bringing true independence back to the country. So he gets them all together. He has this big feast, and he talks to them about all the rulers that have come in the last several years. And there's been quite a few. And what he starts thinking in the back of his head is, these people aren't loyal to anybody. Like, they trade out rulers like people change pants. They don't care about anybody. They're not loyal to anybody. They're loyal to whoever is in the best position to make their lives easier or to contribute to their wealth. Well, I can't revolt with these type of people being the backbone of my country. So he has the military shut the doors, lock them in. He basically enslaves the nobles, makes them build the forfeitures, makes them build the defenses. And a lot of them die because it's very harsh, very strenuous conditions. He takes their lands, he takes their money, and he gives it to new nobles. The idea is that these new nobles, they had nothing. These are poor peasants. They have nothing. And I give them wealth. I give them power. They're going to be loyal to me because I'm the kingmaker. I'm the person that allowed this change in their life and them to have this new status. And they are loyal to him. He institutes very strict laws and punishments for breaking those laws. And one of his favorite punishments is something called impalement. And that's where a big stick is stuck through you and you're stuck up on this pole until you eventually die. And they get really good at it. They can do it without piercing any vital organs, so you can live for days while you're slowly dying on this pole. Well, he openly defies the Ottoman Empire, short version. The Ottoman Empire doesn't like that. They're like, but we got this other son. This other son's more loyal to us. He came in earlier in his childhood. He's really bought into the Ottoman culture. He is an Ottoman at heart. And so even though he is the bloodline, he's our guy. And he'll do what we want him to do. So he sends him with another army to try to run out Vlad. Well, Vlad's able to get a little bit of an advantage on him early, but it doesn't last long. This is a huge Ottoman Empire. Vlad has to decide how I'm going to hold these people off. Now, my military is not big enough to really engage them and actually win a war. And diplomacy, I mean, what's diplomacy going to get us? What do I have to bargain with? He decides that the best way to insulate his country from these Ottoman people trying to invade is to build this forest of impaled individuals. Some of the Ottomans he's fought on the battlefield, some of his own people, some criminals, but just thousands of people impaled on sticks, a forest of impalement. Well, the Ottoman Empire gets to that point and they stop and they go, oh my goodness, what kind of person could do this? What kind of horrible, disturbed, evil individual could even think about doing such atrocities? Well, they send in a negotiation team. And Vlad understands Ottoman culture, Ottoman religion, all that kind of stuff. So he knows that when the person comes in to negotiate, they're not going to take off their hat. It's against their religion, it's against their culture. Well, Vlad insists. And of course, the negotiator says, it's against my religion. I'm sorry, I can't do that. So Vlad has the hat nailed to his head and sends him back to the Ottoman Empire, saying, when you come and see a great ruler such as me, you obey my traditions. Ottomans are just furious and just out of their mind with this. Well, they come in, they run him out, and install his younger brother, who does exactly what they want him to do. Vlad makes it out of the city, out of the country, makes it up north, makes a deal with the Hungarians, and honestly dies within a few years. The point of the story, and the reason I tell the story, is there's two versions of this story. There's the more general version, where this is one of the most evil men in history, one of the most evil men that ever lived, could do things that no one else or very few people have ever been capable of doing. He was storied to have set an 8 in the midst of all these thousands of people being impaled. There's a story where a nobleman makes a comment about the stench, and Vlad has him impaled higher than the rest so that he doesn't have to be bothered by the stench below him of all these other people rotting. His punishments are so severe that he can leave valuables in the center of town and no one dare touch them, because the pain and the suffering that would come from that is just unspeakable. So for a lot of the world, this is one of the most evil human beings that's ever existed. He is the epitome of injustice, of being immoral, of being an evil, not good person. But in the country where he ruled, there's statues erected to him. He is a national hero. His people argue that this was an individual who, at a time when the two greatest empires on earth were battling for world domination, kept this small country with barely a speakable army, no diplomatic leverage, together during a time when they should have been crushed. Yes, he used fear. Yes, he used what we would call terror. But it was the only tool in his toolbox that would keep these other two countries at bay, at least for a little while. And for that, their country sees him as a hero, as a noble person, as a good person, as a just person, as a person that maintained their independence at a time when probably very few people in history could have. If we can't agree about somebody who has done the things that Vlad the Impaler has done, if we can't agree if what he did was just or unjust, moral or immoral, good or evil, then how do we define these terms now? In order to try to do that, we're going to take a step back and we're going to go back to ancient Greek philosophy. And we're going to talk about the works of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Now, Socrates didn't write anything down. He didn't document any of his philosophies or any of the things that he did or any of his thoughts. He just engaged in the Socratic method, which is basically asking questions. asking questions to people, hard questions about their belief system, to highlight the inconsistencies in those belief systems. And then when that person, through their own inability to answer those questions, sees the error in how they view right or wrong or justice or any different number of topics, then they would be forced to reconsider what they thought in the beginning. Now, Plato comes along and he does a lot of writing. He does a lot of documentation. And one of the things that he writes, and one of the main books that we're going to discuss, is he writes The Republic. And this is a book that really deals with justice and fairness and goodness, what it means to be a good person. And he does it in a narrative style. And I think he does it in a narrative style because he understands that there's something powerful about telling a story. You know, if you write a textbook and you put information down, you all have studied textbooks. It's really hard to study. It's a bunch of facts. It's a bunch of information just thrown at you. It's hard to find meaning to it. It's hard to find ways to adapt it to your own life. But if I tell you a story, I'm engaging you through your thought process, through your critical thinking, through your emotional state of mind. I'm really engaging you on a lot of different levels. And we can have hours of dialogue about what that story meant and how to interpret the events that happened and get even more out of it than the writer ever really intended or ever had in their mind. So there's a power to a story that's connecting and that's human, that makes it more real, makes it more relatable, makes it more understandable, and makes it more impactful. And he really starts The Republic in the first 5 chapters, which is where we're going to spend our time, starting out discussing a dialogue between Socrates and several of his friends. Now, his first friend comes in. He's an older gentleman, and he's at the end of his life. And he's spent his whole life, he's went through the passions of youth and the desire to acquire power and money and, women and all these things. And he's in a different place in his life now. The main thing he's worried about at this stage in his life is, how do I get to a good afterlife? That's coming quicker than I want it to. I don't really care about getting more power. I don't really care about accumulating more wealth. Any passions I had for romantic relationships are long gone. I'm interested in where the next stage of my life is going, and that's the afterlife. And so he spends a lot of time, Socrates' friend, praying, offering sacrifices, trying to make amends for things that he's done in the past to try to be able to get to this afterlife. And Socrates engages him in the Socratic method that we already talked about, and he asks him, what does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to be a just person? You say that in order to achieve this afterlife, you have to be a good person and you have to have lived a just life. But what does that mean? I mean, what actually do I have to do if I want to get to that good afterlife? What are the actual steps I have to take? How do you actionize those principles? How do I become a good person? And his friend says, well, it really comes down to, when you break it down, to 2 concepts. You don't tell any lies, and you don't owe anybody anything. And that in itself is the essence of what a just life is. I don't owe anybody anything. Nobody can come back and say I didn't pay them, I stole from them, I took from them, I owed them anything. And I haven't lied to anybody. I've told the truth. That's really at the heart of being a just person, being a good person, and being able to make it to that afterlife. Well, Socrates, in his own unique way, challenges this idea. Okay, is it enough to not lie to people? I mean, surely sometimes there's situations where a lie might be the just thing to do. There's situations where it may be that a lie may be the moral thing to do and the proper thing to do. Surely if someone is going to harm your friend or cause someone some type of injury and you can prevent it with a lie, it wouldn't be unjust or evil to engage in that to keep them from killing or harming someone. Does everyone deserve the truth? If you're trying to get information to hurt someone else, do you deserve that truth? And to not owe anybody. What if you don't have the money and the resources and you can't help but still have some outstanding debt when you die? Does that make you a not good person? Does that make you evil? Does that make you unjust? And his friend acknowledges that it does help to have some wealth as you get old, to have accumulated some wealth as you've aged, so that you don't have to owe anybody for anything. You can pay for things as you need them. And so that you don't find yourself in a position where you have to do anything to pay back any debts or anything like that. But is that really enough to say you're a good person? Does that even mean that you're a good person? Well, his son comes in, Socrates' friend's son, and he tries to clarify what his dad meant. And his clarification is, you need to do good to your friends and harm your enemies. Well, Socrates isn't really sold on this definition either. And he starts questioning the son. Is it always the case that you know who your friends are? Have you ever had a friend or someone you thought was your friend that stabbed you in the back and actually all along had their own best interest and had it in for you throughout the entire course of your relationship? So if you did good for that person, aren't you doing good for your enemy? And why is it that you can harm your enemy when you are so muddied in your idea of who is your friend and who is your enemy to begin with? Do you ever really know who are your friends and who are your enemies? Are you ever really 100% sure who these people are? And if you're not, then should you be harming anybody? So these new clarifications really don't make a lot of sense to Socrates in trying to understand what it means to be a good person, to live a good life, to be a just person. Well, later, another person comes in and has a different take. And his take is a bit more deviant than the takes we've seen so far. His take is basically that justice is an illusion. Justice doesn't really exist, except in the minds of the rich and the powerful. The rich and the powerful create laws, create traditions, create ideas of justice and goodness to surround things and ideas and policies and practices that benefit them. They wrap them up in this pretty package and call it an ethical life, a just life, doing the right thing, being a good person. When in reality, it's just making them richer and making them happier and not doing a whole lot to help out you or your family. If you buy into this stuff, you're a sucker. You're just buying into the manipulation that they're putting forward and buying into this package that is called justice, ethics, goodness. Goodness and justice are just these facades that the people in power are creating. And Socrates challenges this too. And he challenges it from a really intelligent point of view. He starts asking, do rulers make mistakes? And of course, they have to acknowledge, yes, rulers make mistakes too. They're human. Then a ruler creating a policy or a tradition or a value or whatever it is to benefit them may, by accident, create something that benefits you. And if they have the ability to do that, then can we really say, in all honesty, that what they're doing is creating laws and traditions wrapped up in these ideals to benefit themselves when they're not even capable of really creating laws and understanding what's really going to benefit themselves? So at the end of this dialogue, we're really kind of thinking about what these concepts are, looking at some of the early ideas and kind of tossing them around for thought and really thinking about, do these ideas of justice and ethics make sense? Now, in Greek philosophy, there is this concept of the good life, living a good life. And under this concept, there's categories of goodness. Not all goodness is equal. Some goodness is higher on the continuum than others. And there's two distinct categories of goodness. There's intrinsic and non-intrinsic. Intrinsic goodness are things that are good within themselves. Things that are just plain good. Helping someone in need. Eating a good meal. They're good in themselves. There's also non-intrinsic. Now these are things that are steps you take to goodness. Things you do that often have a good result. And so they're good by their acquaintance with the good effects that come from engaging in those behaviors. The behavior doesn't have to be good or bad, but the outcome is usually a good one. There's also categories of evil, and they're the same ones, intrinsic and non-intrinsic. Some things are evil within themselves. If you look at societies across cultures, across time, there's always a taboo, a criminal code, something against, at least on the surface of some forms of its engagement in murder. And I say that because in some of the older codes, there are exceptions for how much punishment you get based on the class of the person that you kill. But there's always this recognition that on some level, murder's wrong. It's just wrong in itself. It's just evil. It has no place in society. It's also non-intrinsic evils, things that you do that may not in themselves be good or evil, but because of the consequences that result in those actions, because those consequences are evil, the action then becomes evil. And like I said, there's also levels of goodness. Some things are more good or less good than others. Saving someone's life in a burning fire is a lot more good than sharing a meal with somebody you know who is not malnutrition, because by saving someone's life, you make a major difference in their life. Sharing a meal with someone might not be as big of a difference if that's not a person that really needs that meal. There is a formula for moral judgment, and the formula basically says this. You need to look at in any situation, what moral principle best applies to that situation, and use that moral principle. You need to ask yourself, does the situation conform to this moral principle? The more closely it conforms to that moral principle, the more accurate that particular principle will be in achieving the right good result. If it's a little bit less, then you have to choose the best of your options. What's going to create the best result based on that philosophical tradition? Socrates is the man that said a life unexamined is not worth living. And I think that gets to the heart of Greek philosophy. Greek philosophy is all about taking yourself outside of the situation, looking at it like a coach would look on a football field, looking at it from a bird's eye view. Really examining what's going on, what different things mean, what reality is, what consciousness is, from an era where you're immune to personal bias, you're immune to your own perceptions, your own cultural beliefs, and you're seeing things for what they are. And that can only be done through the hard work of self-examination and examination of everything around you. It's only when you put on that philosophical perspective and actually analyze that you can begin to understand the reality of what's going on around you and the concepts of things like justice and fairness and goodness. That's because knowledge in itself is virtuous. The more you think about and you examine your life and the things going around you and these concepts, the more clear the real version of these things will be to you. And there's virtue in that. There's virtue in seeing things for what they actually are and understanding things for what they are. We do this through something called reason. And reason is when we take ourselves out of ourselves, out of our personal bias, out of our cultural beliefs, out of our all the things we've been taught throughout our lives. And we examine the world not as we wish it to be, but as it actually is. It's only then that we can get to the heart and the truth of anything. That intellect, that thought process, that develops true truth and is the only thing that can, according to Greek philosophy. According to Plato, there's several different types of knowledge that people need to be aware of and that people operate under. The lowest level of knowledge is conjecture and imagination. In order to highlight what this actually means, let's look at the allegory of the cave. In the allegory of the cave, there's a bunch of people that are chained inside this cave, and they don't see anything that's going on outside the cave. They see images, they see shadows as people and objects pass by. And so all they're left to understand the real world is these shadows and these movements. And they do as all people would do. They try to interpret what they're seeing. And of course their interpretations are wrong because it's kind of like looking at the clouds in the sky and trying to figure out what the clouds look like. You don't know what a horse looks like if you've been locked in that cave forever. You see this big, massive shadow going by. You picture a giant or a big cat or who knows what else that could be responsible for that shadow. But you don't have the knowledge and the understanding to be able to really interpret what you're seeing and understand it. Think about that from the terms of our lives. How many times in our lives have you, me, all of us thought something was one way to find out it was another? We had a limited amount of information, and based on that limited amount of information, we filled in the gaps cognitively, and we came up with a story we told ourselves that fit what we were seeing or what we knew. And so we assumed that the rest was true. These people are plotting to get my job. The government is worried about this or worried about that, not worried about this or that, based on just a little bit of information that we have. We make those conclusions, and they're often the wrong conclusions because we don't have all the facts. We don't have all the information. All we have is the shadows on the wall. That's conjecture, that's imagination. You can't get very far on that. It's only when you step outside the cave, when you're freed from the cave, that you can go outside and say, wow, this was a horse. This was a carriage. This was a family. This was a bird. It's only then that you can understand that those huge shadows may have been cast by small birds based on the angle of the sun at the time that you saw that image. It's only when you get into a higher position in your company or in your organization or your department that you might realize why these policies and procedures are in place and why they make sense. Because you didn't have all the information to begin with. Maybe there was a lawsuit that caused the changes. Maybe there was some problems with personnel that cause the changes. There may be a lot of things playing out you don't know about. But when you get into upper management, those things become clear. And so you can make a better determination about what you were actually seeing. Beyond that's beliefs. Now, these are the things that we've been taught throughout our lives. These are the things that we've been taught by our culture, our parents, all these different entities, schools. These are our belief systems. They're built on perceptions. They're not built on reason. They're built on what we've been told. How we've been told to see this, how we've been told to react in this situation. They're not built on a higher plane of reason. They're just what we've learned to be true. Whether they're true or not, who knows, but it's what we've been learned. It's what we've been raised to believe. Then there's scientific knowledge, things that we look at, we can observe. We can do a scientific study, do the scientific method, analyze, and get a deeper understanding of what's going on. And then beyond that, there's reason, which is really the highest order. And this is where you take yourself out of the picture, you take your biases and all that, and you see the world and everything in it for what it is. So let's take a medical condition and kind of use it to illustrate these different levels of understanding. I start having pains, let's say in my chest. I'm not a medical physician. I don't know a whole lot about medicine. And so I'm left to my own devices to try to think of what it could be. And of course, my mind runs to the worst possible scenarios. Could it be heart disease? Could it be lung cancer? Could it be any of these horrible things? And that's where my mind runs to, because that's what I've seen in the media. That's what I've seen in TV and movies and all the rest. Chest pain, these are the things that come from chest pain. And so I'm only left to my own conjecture, my own imagination to guess what's wrong with me. And that often leads me to the worst possible scenario. Well, I have a belief system. Maybe a lot of people in my family have had heart disease or something like that. And so I listen to other people. And they start telling me, when I felt like that, I had this, and this wrong with me. How many people's had that happen? Had those discussions. And it turned out to be this. I bet that's what you've got. And so that belief system starts building up. I'm being told, hey, it's probably this. But does that mean that's what it is? Does that mean that's what I need to be treated for? No, I go to a doctor. Why do I go to a doctor? Because they have scientific knowledge. They have knowledge and diagnoses based on tests and measurements that have been found to be scientifically valid through decades and tons of research studies in the scientific method, that if they do this scan and this blood test and this test, they can give me a true answer as to what's wrong with me. It's a better answer than I came up with on my own when I was just guessing what I had. It's a better answer than what I had when I was talking to other people about what similar symptoms they had and what was wrong. Because it's based on a scientific foundation, a foundation of tons of research and study. And so now I know what's wrong with me. I have a diagnosis. And they can treat it. So that scientific knowledge is higher than what I initially imagined or conjured up in my own mind, than what I've been told by the people who had similar symptoms. But there's a higher level that I can go to too, and that's reason. And if I think about it through true, pure reason, then I can start thinking about what this particular disease means to me, means to my family, means to the connectedness of myself to humanity itself, to being human. And so these are the different levels, and it's kind of a visualization of how that works. So let's take a closer look at the ideas that we've talked about what it means to be a good person, what it means to be a just person in the context of the criminal justice system. Justice, according to Greek philosophical thought, is all about giving people what they deserve. Think about the idea of distributive justice in Greek philosophy. For example, according to Greek philosophy, if I want to understand the justness of distributing anything among the people, I really need to understand the purpose of what it is I'm distributing. The telos, the end. What is the purpose of this thing? So if I have a box of flutes, I should distribute those to the best flute players. Because after all, what is the purpose of a flute? It's to be played well. And so in order to get the best play out of that flute, I need to distribute it to the best flute players so that all of society can benefit from hearing this wonderful music. And that's basically how you decide, according to Greek philosophy, who gets what. It's who is it meant for and who's going to do the best for society by having that. If we're talking about political power, who are we going to decide should be the person that has the most power in society? It's going to be people who care for society, who are good debaters, who are good at attacking the issues, at creating and executing plans that make life better for the people in the community. Because the purpose of government is to serve the community. So you want the people best able to do that. The telos. In the criminal justice system, we look at the different roles that police officers and criminal justice practitioners have. According to ancient Greek philosophy, we should award those different titles, those different ranks, those different units to people who are best able to do whatever it is those units are meant to do. If I have a hostage negotiation unit, I should hire and promote to that unit the best people who can connect with other people, who can empathize with other people, who can work with people in highly stressful crisis situations and de-escalate things, because that's the telos. That's what they're there to do. It would make no sense to put somebody there who just has been with the force for 20 years but can't get along with anybody and definitely can't empathize or connect with someone in a state of crisis that they likely caused themselves. Because that doesn't get to the heart of what you're doing. Let me give you an example. And this is a discussion item that I want you to think about. We may discuss later in the class. Let's take, for example, computer forensic technicians within police departments. Police departments have all kinds of rules about who can and can't work for their police department. Rules that some of them need to be strictly adhered to. Things about character, things about people's ability to engage with other people and work with other people. Those are very important. You don't want people who are problematic working for police forces and having arrest powers who might engage in violent or criminal behavior themselves. But there's also a lot of qualifications and ways of thinking about you have to pass a police physical and run and jump and hoot and holler and go through this academy and all this running and training and weightlifting and all that to get out and then engage in detective work that is focused on cybercrime. Now, in this particular job, you're not going to do a lot of running around, hooting and hollering, lifting weights. You're going to be sitting behind a computer investigating cybercrimes. Now, I'm not saying you won't ever be in the field and there aren't components of that, but your job is the ability to do your job is more dependent on your ability to process that information, to get that information from a computer source, to understand those processes than it is about running and hooting and hollering. So let's say you have two candidates for this job to be a detective of cybercrime. One is a person who ran, hooted, and hollered, worked their way through the force, up the ranks, been there 15 years, immaculate record, a wonderful human being, but has limited computer skills. You have another candidate who's never been a police officer, never ran, hoot, and hollered, but they've been a consultant with the police department, and they are highly, highly skilled in all the technological components to being a highly effective cyber crimes detective. A lot of times that second guy or girl won't get the position because they only hire sworn police officers who 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, ran, hoot, and hollered through academy to be able to get the privilege of being that. Well, what if that second person is in a wheelchair? They're handicapped. They couldn't run, hoot, and holler. But they're better skilled, better able. The theology of it, they are better able to conduct the functions of a cyber crime detective than the police officer that 20 years ago ran, hooted, and hollered through the academy. Now, I'm not saying there's no value to the academy. What I'm saying is that from a strictly theological point of view, the purpose, the telos of that detective position is to understand and investigate highly technological, highly sophisticated, online, and computer fraud. Having skills in that area would make you better able to do that. It would better match what you would be doing in that position than having those athletic skills 20 years ago. And so that's one of the ways that we can look at how the ideas of Greek philosophy still play an important role in what we do now as criminal justice professionals. Another example would be looking back at the ideas of reason and scientific knowledge, looking beyond just conjuncture and imagination, looking at new procedures, say forensic science, for example. If we're going to continue down this road of implementing new forensic techniques, it's important that they're established in something more solid than beliefs or mere conjuncture and imagination, but in scientific method. I say that because there are some questions about certain forensic techniques that are well known in the field of forensic science about just how scientific some of these sciences are, especially things like bite mark analysis. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that it's not really that accurate. But we still use it because there's this belief system we've been taught that over the years that this is a real way that we can match offenders to crimes. And what we're seeing is through the Innocence Project and other organizations and other work that these techniques often result in wrongful convictions. The FBI has had to come out and say that fingerprints aren't the gold standard we once thought they were. And that's because fingerprints aren't as unique as we've been led to believe over the years. There was an incident where a terrorist, the wrong person was arrested for the crime. He wasn't even in the country where the terroristic activity happened. But his fingerprint matched the print at the terrorist site. And turns out that the match, when you do a fingerprint match, there's no consistent governmental body that really oversees that. So every state, every location kind of creates their own rules. And they decide how many matches you need in structures on the fingerprint, ridges, swirls, that kind of thing, to be able to say it's a positive match. Some require more, some require less. The less you require, the less likely that you're going to have an accurate fingerprint match. So there's questions about the validity of that. They actually found the guy that was the terrorist, and it turns out that their fingerprints matched, but not if you do a more deeper analysis than what was required in the original matching. There's human error in these types of evidence pieces that also needs to be taken into account. And so even though we've been led to believe that some of these forensic science techniques are steeped in hardcore science, what we know from a federal level is there's usually no consistent regulation across states. There's no American Medical Association in charge of forensic science, anything like that. No governing body that sets standards. And so a lot of times people make their own. We know that a lot of these techniques aren't as scientifically studied as what you would see in things like medicine and other natural sciences. It's perfectly acceptable in forensic science for a new technique to be tried a few times, presented to a judge, and a judge say, yeah, I'll accept that as a forensic technique. And then over time, it builds that belief based on that conjuncture or imagination in the beginning. Over time, that belief starts to set in because it's what we've been told over and over. This is a reliable technique. And all the while, we see problems. And thanks to things like DNA testing, which is a lot more accurate than some of these others, we're seeing some of the fallacy of some of these other forensic techniques. And even with DNA evidence, they say it's 99.9% accurate, and the DNA evidence is, but one thing we are seeing is that there's some cases where human error plays into it, or people make mistakes. And that plays into the accuracy of the evidence as well. So the way to get beyond that is to create national standards based on years and tons of research and trying and testing these measurements to make sure they're accurate, to make sure they're saying what we say they're saying, and do the work so that we're not just operating on conjecture and belief, but we're operating on a scientific structure, a higher plane of thought. And then even to reason and asking ourselves, what does this mean for the greater criminal justice system? What does this mean for the idea of detective and investigating crimes and prosecutions and defenses and for society as a whole? I want to take a minute and talk to you about, we're almost to the end of this, but I want to talk to you also about a debate that's been kind of going on in the criminal justice field for a long time now. It's another debate we're not going to answer today, and we're not going to answer in this class, but I do want to discuss it with you, and it'll be part of your discussion board this week. What is it that we want our police officers to do? What do we want them to do? How do we want them to behave? How do we want them to function in our society? How do we want them to even look? There's an emblem you'll notice on a lot of police cars. It says to protect and serve. But what does that mean? They're kind of two contradictory things. You can be my protector, which might bring out ideas of paramilitary presence, a forceful presence in my community, a protector of me from the violence of the criminal behavior that's going on in other areas of my community. And then there's the serve part. The idea that you should be in service to me. You should help me and society and your community as a whole become a better version of itself, become happier, healthier, more productive. That there should be that service element as well. And the question basically is, what do we want our police officers to be? Do we want them to be more like warriors? People who are in here fighting crime. They're doing the hard and dirty work. They're risking their lives every day. They're coming in with paramilitary vehicles and they're working every day to make sure that our streets are safe through those mechanisms. Or do we want them to be more like a guardian, a protector, someone who instead of coming in with a paramilitary presence, comes in with a helpful presence. Comes into the community, meets with community members and businesses and schools and community organizations, and tries to get involved and say, hey, what's wrong? What can we do to help? What can we do to prevent these crimes from occurring? What can we do to make your lives better? What is it that we want our police officers to be? Because if we want them to be warriors, then we have to acknowledge that they're going to have a more battleistic paramilitary presence in our communities. If we want to be more like guardians, then we want them to be more like helpers, a part of our community, part of a team to improve the conditions that we live in. And together we come to that better, safer place. Think about it. There's no right or wrong answer. Again, this is a debate that's been going on for a long time. This is the short synopsis of it. But think about it and give me your thoughts. I want to end this class with another story. And this story will make more sense next week, more than it will today. And this is a story, again, by Plato. It's called The Ring of Gyges. Essentially, there's this group of shepherds, and they got a small community outside of a bigger kingdom. And again, I'm giving you a short version here. And they're trying to decide who's going to go tell the king that we didn't make enough this year to pay what he feels like he should get in tribute. And this is not a good king. This is not a kind king. This is probably not going to end well for whoever goes and tells the king. And so they're all like, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. Well, Gyges is wandering around. He's on his way to this meeting. And the earth opens up and there's this big cavern. And he goes down in there and he's wandering around. There's all kinds of magnificent pieces down there. But he sees this one statue. And on the statue there's this ring. And he takes the ring and he puts it on his finger. And while he's in this meeting and everybody's like, no, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. He starts playing with the finger like a lot of us would. And turns the ring one way and he disappears. And becomes invisible. Turns it the other way, he's visible again. Well, he begins thinking, what can I do with this? This is kind of a nice power right here. What can I do to improve my situation just a bit? He goes, you know what? I volunteer. I'll go talk to the king. Short version, he goes to the kingdom. He uses his power of invisibility to take over the kingdom, take the king's place, marry the king's wife, and create all that power for himself. We'll talk about what this story means next week when we pick up trying to understand just what the right thing to do is. Have a great week. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, just let me know. Bye.